Thank you very much for the introduction. No pressure taken to basically establish this forum as the meatiest part of the day, but we'll try to make that work. This morning we already discussed briefly, how we are looking from different perspectives to the challenges that we have, both from a carbon as well as from a circularity perspective, the opportunities also that it provides, and also the wider context in which this all takes place, both at an EU as well as a global stage. As Tim already mentioned, we have a unique opportunity this afternoon to discuss this. We've got Wolfgang Trunk here from the European Commission, who has been very instrumental in the development of the packaging and packaging waste regulation. We've got Jody herself from Nestlé, so global public affairs lead, also including packaging, circularity. So we can hear directly from business. Joachim is the managing director of EXPRA, the Extended Producer Responsibility Alliance that spans a whole series, a few dozen industry-owned and not-for-profit EPR or packaging recovery organizations. So he can speak on that behalf. And of course we've got also Francesca Stevens, who has been the managing director at Europen since 2020, and also has a whole series of responsibilities before that in public affairs. So we've got different angles: packaging, supply chain, extended producer responsibilities, individual business, and the European Commission to discuss this. Wolfgang, if I may start with you, I cannot imagine for this audience a better person to explain what this PPWR is actually about. So what is it aimed to achieve, if you like?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hans, and thank you for the invitation. Pleasure to travel to Amsterdam, which is just 2 hours with the train, so all fine. On that, indeed, it is a very, very wild time. I remember 2 years ago when we were just in the day before we finally published it, in the cabinet, in the von der Leyen cabinet, says just a small step, and then we are there. It was in November 22, and now we are 2 years older, everybody, and we had a tremendous time behind us. I can say I have already gone through several co-decision procedures in my career, but this was by far the most challenging one, because there were so many diverging interests, so many industries concerned, and so I must say I'm really extremely happy where we are today with the draft text after the jurist linguiste revision. Of course, it is not perfect, but considering the circumstances we are navigating through, I must say we can be really content with what is now in the text. We have a lot of issues there. We are well aware. We meet every day with stakeholders and are with open ears here what are the concerns. But we are convinced that we can remedy all or mitigate all these concerns. The important thing is, coming a little bit more to your question, is the difference. What makes the difference is this shift from, let's say, a waste legislation which is working with, I call it often, aspirational targets at a member state level to get a clearer grip on the ground or on the road, and so that we can really make the difference with our legislation and do not have to go through lengthy infringement procedures, launch an infringement procedure against a capital, against the government in, let's say, I take now Greece, sorry, but just as an example, this is a very lengthy and procedure which in the end is not very efficient. And this is what we learned and what we want to improve now with this legislation. So this is one big change that we are directly impacting on the economy directly. And we hope, and we are still convinced, that in the majority of the cases we will induce the change to the good. Of course, there are many in each transition you have winners and losers, and we are aware that there are also operators or industries that have to radically to adapt their business cases or their concepts, their strategies. But overall, we are fully convinced that it will deliver a lot of economic benefits to the European economy. Only in the second part, but also in the second to the citizens. But the main winner I see is the industry, also with respect to this international competition to which we are confronted. I also today I was speaking in bilateral meetings with young innovators, and I see this as specific. This is our strength here in Europe to cope with these challenges that are now with the new regulation. And you know, the regulation is directly applicable. And so once the proposal is published, the text is published, the industry has a legal certainty that this is valid from Lisbon to Tallinn. And you have really, and of course, Francesca, I see you on the screen. We had to suffer to swallow a lot of derogations, national derogations. Of course, it is at cost of harmonization or at this scaling up and internal market benefits that we could materialize. But in the end, I think all in all, we even also if we had to give up on many ambitions, I think also to establish already reuse targets. It is if we establish all these if we force to establish these structures, these architectures, then it's not so important. It's only secondary whether the target is 10 or 20%. I think if a structure is there, it allows the industry to go maybe to 50. And this was the intention. Therefore, for us, it's now important that, first of all, the text is published in the official journal so that they have a smooth final adoption of the text. And secondly, that then the industry tries to adapt to the new framework, to the new rules, and only then that we as Commission, we will thoroughly observe the developments only as a backup, that we then say, okay, maybe here we have for this specific packaging format or stream, we have a problem, and then we might, and then we, of course, we will come up with a solution to have a pragmatic or not to avoid disruptions, but only as a backup or as a last resort. Now it's the time to set the scene and to have the perspective where we go into this green transition, and then I trust in the European industry to go for it.
Wolfgang, thank you very much. Of course, I would like to ask the other panelists, for their initial responses. But before we do so, Tim, we've got 2 Slido questions for you. So that's a little bit of infrastructure now. But if you can get, that up and ready like you did earlier today.
Yes, could you show the slides, please? So the first question is very simple. If you're from outside Europe, I guess this question isn't relevant to you, but if you're based in Europe or you have operations in Europe, could you just give us a snapshot of how ready you think your company is to comply with PPWR? So number 1 means not at all, 10 means completely ready. Interesting.
It is interesting, because that is not too bad, I would say. So congratulations to you all. We will discuss afterwards, after this session. Where do you still believe that is the case. But I think for the other panelists, I mean, taking this into account, when you discuss your initial response is quite interesting. We do have a more detailed question,
That's
Tim.
right, yes. So I'll launch another poll now.
Yeah, that lists several issues of potential, concern. And, before handing it over to the panelists, we just wanted to gauge, where you are in terms of the potential challenges or uncertainties that,
Yes.
that you face.
Can you show the other poll on the screen, please? So the question here is, which regulatory issues are you most concerned about? Gaps and disconnects with PPWR, derogations and the impact on harmonization, ability to meet goals, things like supply chain transformation, recyclability at scale, infrastructure harmonization, and single market for secondary materials. Fourthly, global implications, for example, third country trading agreements, the context of INC 5 coming up soon in Busan, competitiveness, and finally, monitoring compliance.
I think this is also quite a clear picture.
Clear answer.
Very clear answer. So ability to meeting the goals, derogations, and then at the bottom, the global implications. But we will nevertheless, touch a little bit on that later on as well. But thank you very much for doing this. This at least gives us, an indication of where you are in your mind when observing this panel. Francesca, may I, give you the floor first with your view and comments, both good and bad, on the PPWR?
Yes, thanks, Hans, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, apologies for the empty chair there at the venue. And thanks, Wolfgang, for your initial words on PPWR. I think I don't have to stress again, but everybody knows European position. So we represent the entire packaging supply chain across Europe. Has been always one of support of the goals and the driver behind the packaging and packaging waste regulation. So that's never been under discussion for us. What we question were indeed a few other things, and one was already hinted by Wolfgang, the harmonization of the rules, because for us this was goal number one, I would say, because without harmonization it's going to be very hard to meet the circular economy goals. It's something we like to repeat often in European, that we don't believe in 27 mini circular economies, but in one single circular economy across Europe. And that's an important concept to understand, because if we fragment and continue to fragment the single market, it's already very fragmented with a bunch of national rules that go in different directions. We will not have the investment and the scales required for those investments to meet the circular economy goals. And I like to take the argument forward to waste, because we now finally hearing also political level, at European level, and this is part also of the new political guidelines announced by President von der Leyen, is the talks about something we've also been advocating for a long time for, which is a single market for secondary raw materials. However, we already have lots of little barriers there, starting with the waste shipment regulation, which was only recently revised, which still impedes to a certain extent the free movement of waste across Europe, even across neighboring countries, sometimes even within the same country, with a bunch of heavy authorization, even when we talk about non-hazardous waste. So how are we going to see a single market for secondary raw material anytime soon? Some of our members have done major investments, for example, in Eastern Europe, for recycling, harder to recycle packaging. We heard in the previous presentation of the issue of harder to recycle packaging can be recycled. Large investments have already been made to recycle that. What happens if there is no collection and if that waste doesn't move across border because of the barriers? So clearly harmonization for us remains, one of the weakest points of this regulation. We know it was political, but that also says a lot about the willingness of other actors to join the business commitment, because the business commitment is there towards a circular economy when it comes to packaging. And those actors are, of course, the national governments, The other actor is the European Commission. And again, I'm not pointing fingers here at Wolfgang or the waste unit in the European Commission. I'm talking about the political leadership of the European, and of course, many other actors, waste management operators. Everybody has to do its part. And I will just leave you an example here, how we feel that's not yet the case on waste management infrastructure and what it takes to actually have separate collection happening for real across all the member states. We heard a huge, amazing silence from the NGOs. We've been trying to involve them in joint advocacy, but they've been very silent. I guess it's easy. We are not pointing your finger at industry and telling how bad business are, but it's harder when you have to do it against the member states, local municipalities, and other actors. That, for me, is a blatant example of the fact that everybody needs to do his part. The same when it comes to the harmonization of the collection. Massive opposition from waste management operators about harmonizing the colors of the bins across Europe, harmonizing the symbols. Look what Spain is doing. It's introducing a national label for sorting instruction, which will enter into force, as most of you, I'm sure, know, because you're preparing for it. And if you've probably already done, the investments needed to enter into force on January 1st. But we have the PPWR that finally will introduce an harmonized sorting instruction system across the EU. Unfortunately, there was no action from the European Commission in recalling Spain that this is an infringement of EU rules, as it was the case with the Triman logo in France. So clearly, we love the good of the PPWR proposal, the goals, the recyclability scale. We question, for example, how we will achieve recyclability scale, which is a market access requirement in 2035 without a functioning single market and without harmonized rules.
Thank you, Francesca. While you were speaking, I heard Wolfgang express a silent sigh. So I will give Wolfgang the opportunity to respond first before we move on.
Yeah, Francesca, of course, I admire you for your sustained and enduring requiring this harmonization. And you mentioned the Spanish case. Of course, we are not happy, and it was in a very bad moment when the Spanish notification came. But there are also positive examples, like just happening now in France with their national rules. I just read today that they will also abstain from coming up with national rules in view of the upcoming packaging regulation. The other thing that I want to make is you mentioned von der Leyen's, the President von der Leyen's announcement, and indeed, even though we are not yet in the official journal with the packaging regulation, we are already, even in my field, preparing the next big thing, and this is for DG Environment the most important thing for the next mandate, and this is the so-called Circular Economy Act. And this will be another regulation, and there we will have, on a broader scope, concrete measures. We will dig out concrete measures to further create or overcome this bias of between recycled secondary raw materials and virgin materials. So we are really trying, first of all, to create this business case for secondary raw materials. And here I invite you, because we are still internally in a very early stage for the Circular Economy Act, to come up with ideas bottom down or from the real economy, not from the Berlaymont, but from the real economy, with ideas where are barriers to the to the market, to a value chain for secondary raw materials. We are open to all concrete measures, and there I come back to one discussion point which I could participate before. The lunch break is reporting obligations. This is also an important area where we want to, in the Circular Economy Act, have a specific focus also with the designated commissioner for environment to have a simplification or to address unnecessary reporting obligations, to make it to reduce also the administrative burden. And I think also this is a clear message now in November 24. I consider the time is really, really good, coming up with radical approaches when it comes to these reporting obligations. I also am already only 3 years in this area of of waste legislation, and I see so many reporting obligations that are, I can say, even useless, or that are really poorly used, the reported data. So therefore, also in the Circular Economy Act, this will be another element when it comes to competitiveness of the waste value chain, also to consider this administrative burden to which the operators are exposed. But again, you can really now, apart from all your preparatory work for the secondary legislation on the packaging, you can also still go already think a little bit beyond for the Circular Economy Act. What are very concrete measures how to improve this market for secondary raw materials? Today in the train here, I was in a meeting online where we were reflecting internally with our colleagues dealing with taxation about having a different VAT system for products which contain recycled content, because we can say the recycled content had already undergone a VAT taxation. So all these things are also internal reflections, how to improve the delta, or to make the secondary raw materials more attractive in comparison with virgin raw materials.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Joachim, from your perspective, I mean, you are dealing with your EPR systems with, collection towards recycling. Increasingly, there's more and more responsibilities being put on EPR systems, differentiated EPR fees, I mean, what have you. So if you look towards the PPWR, what is it that concerns you and what is it that you like?
From our point of view at the moment, I was happy to see that so many companies feel well prepared already. I have to admit that my members are still in the questioning stage. So we are trying to understand the text and the implications for our business. So I'm apologizing to Wolfgang for all the questions, and I'm afraid this will increase over the next weeks and months. So, and to tackle every of the new obligations and so on, and you have to see it that Belgium, for Splus and Valipak, they see it from a totally different angle than if you go to Bulgaria, to Greece, or even to Finland. In Greece, if you have 50% free riding rate, roughly, the 50% paying, they feel more and more like idiots. And as more you raise the bar, you question yourself, why do I be a good guy and not wait like the others? So we are still in the stage to understand how all of this can be implemented in the various member states and what are the conditions to make it work. And early warning report, we heard it today, yesterday during the SPC conference as well. We have to create the basis for all of this still in many countries. So I'm counting on the Commission as well not to send only letters, but that there will be a strong follow-up, because we have in some countries, I think, to change the governance, to make it possible, to see If it works in Belgium, for example, if they can make it happening, what do we have to change in Romania, Bulgaria, you name them, to make it possible there as well? Because in the end, we want a happy life for 27 member states.
And what do you like?
The challenge. It will keep me in job for the next 10 years. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, the class is half full. Wolfgang, any direct response on that?
Yeah, well, of course we are, if you think about my director and me, we started more or less at the same time in DG Environment, in the waste area, and we both asked directly, why do we have these national EPR systems? And this is a little bit the price that you have to pay, and it's not only that the member states in their ministries they are keen to keep their garden, the fence around their garden. It's also the pros, you guys, the national, you named FOS Plus and these EPR systems that they say, okay, I have my area, my claim, and so this is a little bit. We try to go further, and let's say now with the Circular Economy Act, when it comes to EPR, we have also our ideas. I will not mention it now, but we are also here have some very concrete ideas what we can do more. But in the end, your point, I have to play this ball back to you and to the member states, but now that you are here and you named it, that it is such a different situations, this is because we do not have an EU-wide system, and maybe we get one day to at least to it as regards registration to an EU register, but we the Commission would be happy to go further in this area, but we had to surrender as in many parts. Also to Francesca, we you know how much we were fighting for these harmonized rules, also for labeling exemptions from the EU labeling. But in the end, it is a compromise which is there. But nonetheless, all in all, I think it is a very good breakthrough in the whole field of packaging.
Thank you, Jody. Over to you. What is your reflection on the PPWR from Nestlé's perspective, or maybe the wider industry's perspective?
Yeah. I can't speak for the industry as a whole, but I can share what it looks like from where we're sitting. We operate in 188 countries, including all the EU member states. And so globally, we're looking at 80 EPR regulations that have been written and are in force, 35 that are in draft. Combine that with the PPWR, which goes a lot further. The strength of the PPWR is probably the largest regulatory package that's guiding the shift from voluntary commitments and voluntary reporting by companies, voluntary EPR in many cases with collection programs established around the world, to a comprehensive package that's mandatory for everyone. And this is the transition we're starting to see everywhere in the world. But the PPWR goes further, and it also sets very specific guidelines. Some we're eagerly waiting to see what the results will be, like the secondary legislation on design for recycling, and also how will we manage redesigning packaging that may or may not be compliant. If it's not already compliant with D4R, the 2-year timeline is a bit challenging before 2030. But most important is the trajectory it's taking us on, because if we put it in the context of the UN treaty, and the developments, at least in the current paper that is out and up for debate in Busan, where we'll be from next week, is the PPWR goes further. And so European companies will be better prepared, whether it's with design for recycling, the changes in the collection and the recycling infrastructure, the advances with the PROs, and hopefully dramatic expansion of clever eco-modulation that sends clear messages to industry about how we need to be moving and when. And I think that it positions the European companies particularly well. When we look at what's been happening from a trade perspective we haven't seen a lot of multilateral progress at the WTO in the past decade, but we have seen a proliferation of bilateral trade agreements. And the colleagues at the European Commission are the world champions, or can we say Olympic gold medal winners, in negotiating bilateral trade agreements. And so if we look at the 50 countries where there are bilateral trade agreements with the European Union, we see tremendous strength. Because from these bilateral agreements will come economies of scale, as large and middle-sized companies in the countries that have these trade agreements with Europe will be looking keenly at the design for recycling guidelines and looking at the eco-modulation models that are developing in Europe to drive collection of recycled content post-consumer and to transform it with the future circular economy package. There's going to be pre-alignment even before new national regulation is written in these other countries, because economies of scale will be shifting, and any company in a third country who wants to trade with Europe will need to comply. And so the way we see it is that the European Union has gone far beyond other major geopolitical actors in defining regulation in the packaging and waste space. And this is going to serve as a guide, and it's going to have a positive note for those of you who are on the left side of the chart worried about PPWR implementation. I think ultimately the package is going to position European industry exceptionally well to be ready and to be leading in this transformation that's taking place, as resources will be fewer and will be struggling in terms of how do we address climate change, how do we adapt, and how do we preserve funds for investment to make sure our industries and our communities are resilient in the face of a very changing physical environment around us.
Yeah. So it almost seems like a deliberate strategy of using the PPWR for trade perspective.
I don't want to put our friend Wolfgang on the spot, but it's a question. And certainly the trade angle really transforms the implication of this policy into a strength. And it may be bumpy as we make the transition from voluntary to mandatory, but the choices made by the Commission have positioned European industry to be in a much better position than other regions of the world in the future.
Yeah. Francesca, I remember you already mentioning several years ago, and I think it was also in a conversation with Mattia, so in the European Commission as well, that this was, not necessarily environmental regulation. This was kind of an industry proposal. So what we're now hearing is that this could be good, actually, for the competitive, position of Europe. Would you agree with that?
Yes, it clearly is, an industrial policy measure. I mean, all of the environmental and sustainability legislations that we adopt in Europe, it's industrial policy. It's always said that, the European Union doesn't have a competence on industrial policy. Well, it does, because, it's deeply affecting business investment decision and, production decision and so on. I'm kind of, I'm old, so I've been around Brussels for many years. And I've been hearing this thing that, we're going to lead by example for too many years now. That because we decide to go on the sustainability journey, then we're going to have this competitive advantage. I do agree with that statement, right? I would want to make that perfectly clear. I just don't think we're leading on the sustainability journey. We're not leading on innovation. If you take, any of the annual record that are pulled out, saying which are the top 100 innovating companies, we have two normally in that list, two German ones, Bosch and Siemens. And I don't know for how long we will still have those two companies in that list. So, I'm not the one that says this, but, there was a recent report by former Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi with recommendation to relaunch European competitiveness. And one of the biggest reasons for Europe increased productivity gap against the US is innovation. And is how we're back on innovation, right, compared to the others. So I think it's about time that we take off our shoulders the fact that they were the best in the class, because I don't think we are. We are on paper, we would like to be, but how can we be the best in class if we are losing our basic industries, the basic material industries? We're losing them, right? I don't need to mention names, but look at all the basic materials, metals, plastics. I mean, we are losing these industries. They're simply investment in these industries are moving away from Europe, and there's been, happening for so many years. So unless we find the recipe, and the recipe is there, but we need the political leadership to implement this recipe to ensure that these industries can continue to thrive, and therefore the rest of the different value chains, the packaging makes no exception to that, can then rely on the competitiveness of the basic material industries and thrive with them. I guess we will not deliver the sustainability goals, and we will not win the competitiveness challenge. And again, I'm really sorry, to bring these gloomy topics again. I started with those in the morning. I gave you some numbers in the morning. The situation is dramatic. There is no more time. And again, it's not me saying that. Please do read the Draghi report if you haven't done so already. The 100 pages of the report are interesting. The 300 pages of the annex are even more interesting because you find lots of numbers and figures in there that are very, very concerning. So, the single market is not a buzzword. I do know that. I do sound like a broken record because all I talk about most time than not is this. But it's a real issue, the fact that we are fragmenting the single market. We're allowing that to happen. If I can just rebut briefly to what Wolfgang said earlier, the reason why France has decided not to go ahead with the adoption of the ban on plastic packaging for fruit and vegetables is not a French government decision. It was imposed by the French court, right? Because and we've been, playing a role in flagging that to the Commission. The Commission told France, please, France, hold on, but actually the Commission should have told France, France, you can't do that. That's a market barrier, which is illegal. So PPWR or no PPWR, you cannot introduce a ban, unilateral ban, with just justification and proportionality of the measure, as we know from the treaty. So the reason why that happened is because of the intervention of the French court. On Spain, I like to flag that it's not really a matter of yesterday. This decree was notified to the Commission in 2022, and we did file information on that, like many other trade associations. In the face of inaction, we also filed formal complaint. So again, I understand, there is a political decision not to intervene, not to go after the member states for violation of the single market. But this is part of what do we want to achieve on our sustainability and competitiveness journey. Trade was mentioned, and I would have agreed with the colleague that, there are lots of bilateral agreements being signed. Clearly, trade has been suffering lately a lot because of the inaction in WTO, because of the stall with the US. And I like to underline that Trump introduced certain tariffs. They were not removed by the Biden administration. And we can only see more coming now that we have, again, a new Trump administration. So the situation for international trade is not a good one. And meanwhile, European industry are so swollen by these major competitiveness challenges that they're facing, that they are starting to ask for protectionist measures. So I like to flag that as the biggest concern I see now, also for the success of the PPWR going forward. If the tendency is going to be that of setting up some artificial barriers just to protect ourselves from recycled material coming from outside of Europe, well, we are not unable to be competitive with our own recycled material because of the structural issue that we discussed earlier and the lack of a single market for secondary raw materials.
Thank you, Francesca. Yeah. Yeah, that's a message not to be misunderstood. Nevertheless, as the chair of this panel, I now have the duty to, also turn it to a bit of a lighter touch, because we don't want to get you out of this room, totally depressed. So I think it's good enough if you have absorbed this message and take it home. Wolfgang, any final comment from you before I, continue to something else?
I'm also old, and I was already in the Commission when Barroso wanted to make the European Union the most competitive area in the whole world. And this was before these Green Deal and sustainability goals were developed. I share, of course, a lot of concerns fully, and of course I can reassure you we read the letter and the Draghi report very, very thoroughly, and we see us with the PPWR confirmed in our approach, and we will follow even more on this in the Circular Economy Act. This will be also a regulation, and this will be also very market driven or market orientated. This is clear. We will only take out of the, let's say, of the Waste Framework Directive, for instance, these areas which have an impact on these markets for secondary raw materials. When it comes to the global competitiveness, you mentioned it. We were in a very tough discussion for instance, on the plastic recyclates in the very last moment of the trilogue negotiations. What to balance, but we have still big problems to have to keep our recycling sector competitive, and we are convinced that the first priority should be to ensure that the waste recycling in the EU is a business case, and that the value added is created here. This is our starting point, and only in the second point we see that we have our obligations to our partners in China and other third countries. For us, it was the final solution is at cost for me of reporting of administrative burden, how to ensure these mirror clause or these requirements. I still find the initial text, at least for the recyclates of the Commission, better, but the wisdom of the co-legislators came to delivered a different result. Now we will have to enforce or come up with this mirror clause to balance out a little bit this, but I also consider this still a little bit the old school to come up with some certification schemes. This is all more reporting administrative burden that actually I would have liked to, and now as a last point on this, there are even people saying let's try to say we do not accept plastic imports, recyclate imports from those member states where we have an export ban under the waste shipment regulation. But this is maybe another conference. This topic. No, all in all, we are also very concerned, Francesca, about the economic situation. Therefore, the more I count on the political backing for, let's say, industrial policy rather in the implementation of the packaging regulation and competitiveness, then I think I would predict that sustainability is will only be followed or come true if it is also a business case.
Yeah, thank you. Joachim, so if we stay a bit with the member states, and I mean Francesca alluded to it quite strongly, there's one obligation in the PPWR that is on the shoulders of the member states, and I've got the personal opinion that it is often overlooked because we don't discuss it that much, and that's the prevention target that the member states have. I mean 5% in 2030, 10 in 2035, and then I think 15% in 2040 against a 2018 baseline. So you collect all that packaging waste. So how are you looking at that specific obligation from member states, and how do you think they would achieve that?
This is, of course, for us very important as well, because we have to plan the infrastructure in a respective way. Yeah? And this can only be done country by country. And if you see, at the moment we are trying to adapt the 22 figures, because up to now we only had 21 figures. So even within only 3 years, we saw in some countries an increase of economy and increase of packaging therefore as well. So the 5%, just from the 21 point of view, mean totally different figures from the various countries. We have some countries, I think like Luxembourg, for them it means 2%, 2 or 3% to my mind. We have countries like Finland, where it means already 23% reduction.
Because it's an absolute target. You cannot compensate for economic growth anymore.
This will have, of course, then dramatic consequences for the collection system as well, and the sorting and recycling if you drop by 20%, if you are able to do it. Yeah. We will have to see this. Also, as far as I understand, most of the prevention should come from reusable systems. So you would have to understand which packaging you will lose in 23 in one way, where you don't need then collection, sorting and recycling, to the reusable systems. Of course, for beverage containers, it will be mainly affect the DRS for one-way packaging. So if you build a new one or you have existing DRS systems, you will have to adapt that a certain percentage of your incoming material will not be there in 2030 and so on. So a simple target will have dramatic effects to the overall infrastructure, which we have to try to foresee as much as possible, not to burn too much money. Yeah? So, but it will be a challenge as well. How can we reduce one-way packaging in the planned way, in a way that it does not hurt our industry as well? Yeah. Because up to now, it was always economic growth goes alongside with more packaging. Yeah. If we like it or not, but that was the rule up to now. Yeah. So, and we have to break this via reuse, via whatever. But we could just stop to sell glass packaging. Then we would fulfill the prevention target. Is this what we want? No. So we have to find smart solutions. Yeah.
Because it's by weight. And you're basically saying the decoupling between economic growth and the use of packaging is no longer sufficient. It's an absolute reduction target. So do you then believe, and maybe it's a question to the three of you, whether the existing reuse obligation in the PPWR, which is for transport packaging and for beverage packaging only, is going to account for that reduction, or is Jody, or is something else on the horizon that needs to happen?
I mean, when we look at reuse,
it's right.
Am I on now?
Yeah.
When we look at reuse, we need to look seriously at the enabling conditions. My company has worked already. We've launched over 20 pilots around the world in reuse in developed countries and developing countries, testing consumer value propositions. And in general, consumers want something that's more convenient and costs the same or preferably less. Everyone loves convenience in their personal life. And when we look at reuse, we need to see a strategy. We need to see a movement, product category by product category. We need to differentiate between beverages, between powders, between grains, which all have different types of barrier property requirements in a reusable container. We need to look, you were talking about industrial policy, Francesca. We need to look at what is the industrial policy going to be around shared infrastructure, whether that be for reverse logistics and the decarbonization of those logistics, whether that be around decarbonization of washing facilities that may be shared, competitive rules, and how does antitrust come to play when we look at shared pool packaging? If we standardize bottles, if we standardize rigid containers, if we start to standardize, let's say, in the beauty sector, what actually are the requirements that industry needs to make and meet, the hurdles we have to jump over so that there isn't an antitrust concern over the standardization of packaging, which would enable reuse at scale. And some of the modeling, for example, the Reuse Revolution piece that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation did 2 years ago now, developed a modeling tool specifically to look at that. What's the participation level you need in order to be able to make break even, and what percentage of total packages in the system need to be in reuse? And we're not looking at low levels. We need to get to substantial volumes in reuse to make it make sense for an industry sector as a whole to move. Because the worst thing we can do is have a requirement. I won't name countries, but some of you may know. Some countries have decided to set requirements in terms of floor space or percentage of total packaging, instead of looking at an actual category of consumer goods that can move to reuse. So there are a lot of things we need to do from an enabling condition perspective to actually set out a framework that makes sense, that works both for large companies as well as works for SMEs, so that they can join without a penalty for being small, and they can join the same pool system with the same operating requirements. I know we have Amy from PR3 is somewhere here who's done really fantastic work on standards for reuse, and she's going to be speaking tomorrow. I think it's a very important conversation, and it's one that we need to engage in diligently as an industry value chain, as regulators, so we can look at how do we build a reuse system that's just as effective as the single-use system we've built today.
Yes, on waste reduction, on the 5%, according to our Commission proposal impact assessment, only 50, a little or 60% at the time comes from these measures that we are mentioning here. Reuse is one of them. The article on waste minimization is another EU measure that is already in there. And the third one, of course, is Article Annex 5, the bans. These would lead to deliver these 60% of the 5%. Now everybody knows, for instance, on Annex 5, we had to give up on, or we limited mainly now on plastic packaging. This is a kind of an excavation of the reduction, of the absolute reduction. Furthermore, on the minimization, we had to admit or introduce a lot of exemptions for a lot of packaging formats that are exempted. So to keep, the message is it will be very hard for the member states to cope with these 5%, considering that these EU measures already enshrined at operator level in the regulation, these game-changing sustainability criteria that I always call them, will not be 60%, but maybe 30%. So they have to come up with additional measures, and then Francesca will directly be very happy to hear that these national measures might disturb the EU, the internal market. So this is a little bit my reply to the reduction, but the biggest change for the member states is not, or challenge for the member states, is not so much if they meet the 5%, if they manage on to cope with this 5% reduction. The big change will be the complete change in architecture. For today, in the current directive, they are responsible to achieve any recycling targets, all these things that are established in the directive. In the future, their main task, the main task of the authority in Den Haag, in Copenhagen, will be to do the market surveillance for these product requirements for the industry. And I have a very big experience in food safety. And what we realized is that this function of the public authorities for the market surveillance is a powerful tool, and it's a new function. Of course, they don't like it because they are more or less controllers and not so much the legislators, which they are today. Today, Madrid can say, I want to ban, I want to introduce a new label. Tomorrow, they cannot do it. But they have to do the market surveillance, which is maybe not so attractive for them, but it is a very powerful tool. So they will, based on a risk-based approach, they can say, okay, I invest, I dedicate a lot of controlling or market surveillance on imports of plastic recyclates. In Italy, I think this is a very, at the borders, I want to have I have a task force, I establish a task force to focus, to make sure that all these plastic recyclates that fulfill the requirements that are spelled out will be spelled out in our secondary legislation. If the German authority says, okay, this is something where I don't have so much interest in, I am more interested in compostability, home composting or whatever of packaging, or another sustainability criteria, or minimization. So this will be in future the new task of the member states to do this market surveillance and then also to have this exchange, to have this network, what we have also in food legislation. It's called Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed. So that if, for instance, if the Italians focus on import controls of plastic recyclates from Bangladesh, and if they find out, okay, they are cheating, it's a complete mess, and they reject it, that then also the harbor in Antwerp or in Rotterdam gets the information. Okay, this operator in Turkey or in Bangladesh has been found to be non-compliant with the EU rules as regards plastic recyclates, and so do we also receive from these in our harbor? So this will be the new thing for the member states to enforce.
Yeah. Joachim, you want to respond? No, you're fine. Okay. I'm mindful of time and leaving room for the audience, but I've got one additional topic that I would like to discuss, and maybe to you, Wolfgang and Francesca. So the whole notion of secondary legislation. So beyond the derogations and exceptions, I think that is the most mentioned downside that people see from this PPWR, which is the number of items in secondary legislation. So what is your expectation in terms of, I mean, there's timing, of course, in the PPWR, but how that is done in reality, and how, to you, Francesca, industry is engaging in that.
Do you want to start, Francesca?
I can, of course. Yes, thanks, Hans, for the question. So we heard about tsunami of legislation when when we had the Green Deal on the table. Now we can talk about tsunami of secondary legislation, and I feel actually for Wolfgang and his colleagues, because that unit in DG Environment in particular, they don't just deal with the packaging and packaging waste regulation, but with many other key files in relation to waste, the batteries regulation, the shipment regulation. So they don't just have our 40 pieces of secondary legislation to write, but many, many more, I think, in the space of a few hundreds in total. So I feel for your crazy workload, and clearly that also means that we want to absolutely, support as much as we can this very technical work that the Commission has to do, and not just because we are nice, but because it's very important. I mean, the timing is at the essence. We heard before talking about design for recycling guidelines, right? So our packaging will have to be fully recyclable by 2030. Industry has not been sleeping. Industry has already been done a lot to make the packaging recyclable. There are a lot of voluntary industry initiative to define those guidelines for the different applications and materials. So we're not starting from zero. And clearly, we hope that work will not get lost and will be used as a way to further progress in the definition of the design for recycling guidelines. But we need them as soon as possible. Right, and the work is formally not yet started, so clearly that's a priority secondary legislation that we need to make sure industry has enough time. It's not going to be enough time because it's really, we are basically less, just 5 years away from the goal, from 2030, but still, and many other more, right, that will have to be adopted. So all I can say that clearly industry and Europe, and in particular with this technical expertise, is of course there to support in any way possible the work of the European Commission, the member states experts, together with the other stakeholders on this. Allow me now to say something as well on secondary legislation. Why would we have 40 pieces of secondary legislation? And Wolfgang and colleagues have many hundreds more to write for the other pieces of legislation. And I'm sorry, but I go back to the political, what has the EU become these days? And when ideology ideology takes over good policy making, then we end up with legislation which is very, very perfect. And again, I can only commend the work of DG Environment in getting the PPWR through. We have been on their side. We've been very supportive of this piece of legislation being adopted, despite its flaws, despite all the challenges. However, again, go back to the amount of times I've been working in Brussels for 23 years. Under the last legislative cycle, I don't think I can cite a single piece of legislation that went through a second reading. And for those of you that are not familiar with this procedure, normally a piece of legislation goes through a first reading, then it has to be further negotiated in the second reading, then there is a conciliation procedure and so on. So everything has been adopted in first reading. Same thing with the Single-Use Plastic Directive. And therefore, you need to fix things afterwards, unfortunately, in secondary legislation. So all I can say that for this current new political legislative term, I hope that this has been understood, that you need time to produce good legislation. You need to put the ideology on the side. There is a pressing matter, but at the same time, we all know that it would have been a lot better to have the revision of the Waste Framework Directive first, do it properly to solve the issues that we discussed before on sorting, collection, infrastructure, and so on, rather than leaving them unattended, because the current revision of the Waste Framework Directive is not dealing with those things. So that's what we have, the major loopholes that we discuss. So I hope that, the next political cycle, and again, that's a message for people that are not in the room, which are the EU and national political leaders, will understand this, that we need better legislation.
Here.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
okay. On the last point, quickly on the last point, I also think that was, let's say, 3 months ago, we really were meant just to prepare the new College of Commissioners for a consolidation, for a breathtaking consolidation mandate. And the only thing that will now come is the Circular Economy Act, but also this and everything what we see in our area. This will be the one-off in the whole directorate where I'm working. So there is nothing else that will come up as basic legislation. So this one act, and this will be also, as I mentioned already, focusing on competitiveness and on markets. Will be market orientated. Now the tsunami. Well, I'm a surfer, and I don't like to call it a tsunami. Of course, it is a wave. It is a massive wave, but I want to reassure you that we will ride this wave. We are already preparing. For instance, you mentioned it, the DFR, Design for Recycling. We will already soon, I can announce, sign an agreement, a kind of memorandum of understanding with Sensenelec to prepare. We have already do the preparatory work with Sensenelec and with the JRC to come up with these design for recycling criteria at a very early stage. We pushed a lot Sensenelec. We did not go for this formalistic. They are even worse than the Commission in Sensenelec when it comes to administrative procedure to validate their standards. Therefore, we said no. We don't need standards for the DFR. We will just Sensenelec will just deliver technical specifications, and this will be then the module, the thing where the JRC will work on. They are involved from the beginning, and also we made sure that in the Sensenelec world, for instance, the SME sector is represented, and also the civil society is represented. So this is just one area where I can reassure we are well aware of the time constraints, and therefore we also said we must have new approaches when it comes to delivering on this, and therefore we don't go for a formal, like in the CPA, for a formal standardization request, which takes already from us until it is at Sensenelec 3 months. We directly said, we made a kind of exchange of emails at director level, and then we have something in the archive where we can nail them down to deliver by end of 25 and so on. So just to reassure, this is only one example, and I could elaborate more on other areas, be it the reporting for the formats for the EPR schemes and so on. And the second important point on the as regards the wave, you are probably you all already applied for to be part of the expert group. And this expert group we were fighting hard to avoid to have this so-called packaging forum because we knew that we will establish this expert group, and this expert group will be the main gremium to prepare the secondary legislation. And I really, and I think I have already some experience in better regulation, and also to what extent do you need external contractors to come up with some study to deliver technical support for a delegated or implementing act from the Commission. I consider the expert group as the main source of technical support for all these secondary legislation, and therefore, and I think we can from DG Environment, we can defend it versus the colleagues, the ayatollahs of better regulation in the Secretariat General, to have this, because it's really faster than making a call for tender for a contract to come up with a study for whatever recyclability, sustainability criteria for plastic recycling or things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is my second point. So first of all, we are already starting in a, let's say, in an innovative way to win some time and to be more efficient. And secondly, we will also the expert group, the newly to be compiled expert group, will be a big player in the game.
Very clear. Thank you very much. Tim, I'm looking at you. We have some time left, for questions from the audience. I'm not sure whether you have already put, questions into in the app. If you have them, please do. And Tim will, pick out the most relevant ones.
There are lots of relevant ones, and we maybe you'd like to stay another 2 hours to
Yes,
answer
we
all
can.
of them. Yeah,
Yeah, that's fine.
I will try to choose the ones that may be most relevant to the most people here. So here's a question. The PPWR appears to place more responsibility to comply with the producers, brands and retailers. Do you think the producers are empowered to make this happen?
Well, if I understood correctly, it says that producers have a bigger responsibility for than the retailers.
No, the brand. He's defining producers as brands and retailers. So
Private label, potentially. Yeah.
Well, we try to abstain pretty much from this power play. We are aware of these market powers. And we had just one thing, for instance, where we put, let's say, only finally, and we agreed to it. It was in the reuse article that it is only the obligation for the retailer to come up with, to cope with the reuse targets, and not also we gave the flexibility. I find it is a smart move. It gives, let's say, those progressive producers or manufacturers or fillers of beer or of whatever the opportunity to say I go 100%, or I can go 100 or 50% in reusable formats, but we do not force every small brewery to go for. And in the end, it's only let's say at the retail stage. Of course, this has implications on the the power. But we in this respect we are marketeers, and also this was our approach also, that we try to follow on the priority access of recyclates, where we at least also that we say we are marketeers, and it is a matter. So here we are aware of it, but we hope that I personally do not count so much or expect so much from this fluffy wording that was introduced in the Article 29 to balance out this thing with own brands, or this will be very, very difficult, this undetermined wording, how to materialize this or how to enforce this. Therefore, I don't count so much on it. I think in the end, but if there is some market power abuse, then we still have the possibility to protect certain sectors.
Clear.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Okay. What chances are there that the PPWR review in 2027 risks pushing back the current target dates?
Well, first of all, I don't like this question, because what? No, I tried to make sure in my first intervention. Now it's the time to send out the signals to the business, to the operators, to the industries, where to go. And I have made so many positive experience to what this pressure can lead, and to what extent we can really nudge fantastic developments in the interest of everybody, in the interest of the business case in Europe, in the interest of the environment, and in the interest of the consumer. Therefore, it is not a good moment already to say, okay, don't worry. In the end, the Commission will exempt this, or will decrease the target, or whatever. So for now, I still want to see what happens. And we have also so many projects, so many pilots, so many public money that went into these innovations to go, and so many startups that I saw and heard and met in the last 2 years. I think we should give them the possibility to roll out, to scale up.
If I may, Tim, I think also the question probably was a mistaken one, because I would imagine that the person that raised the question was referring instead to the SUPD revision in 2027, not the PPWR. So maybe the confusion.
Yeah. Indeed, the 27 is only for the SUPD, and we just launched internally the inter-service steering group for this review. But I can reassure you, we have also review clause for the end of this year, 3 review clauses in the Waste Framework Directive, including we will also combine in our report the one on the Landfill Directive, and this review clause will lead to, it will be a factual report, and this report will say, okay, there is no need for a legislative revision of the articles. And I cannot anticipate the same for the SUPD, but the current political environment, as I said before, is that we are really, this review clause was established in a time when there was a completely politically different environment. And so the Green Deal was very green, and now it's industrial policy that is considering the really the hard times that our economy is confronted with. So I cannot anticipate the 27 SUPD review, but it will not be so much different than the outline of what you heard from our designated commissioner in her hearing in front of the Parliament.
Thank you. Okay, another question, which I'm afraid, Wolfgang, is probably for you again. The approval of the PPWR for the member states seems to have been postponed to December. How will this affect the real implementation? In fact, I'm aware that we have quite a lot of members of our audience who are from outside of Europe, and we also have some people watching on a live stream from Australia, Brazil, India. Maybe it would be interesting just to give them a little bit of context about the process factually as it's unfolding at the moment.
Well, the timeline as of today is that the Parliament will approve the text within the next 2 weeks. Everybody expects it. It is not a formality, but according to our contacts, it will be an approval in 2 weeks, still in November, and then, as we have two legislators, the Parliament and the Council, and subsequently it will be, it's so-called an A point in any council. It doesn't have to be the Environment Council. It is, and there it is also, an A point means it is without debate and without vote. It's just the formal approval of the text as elaborated by the jurist-linguiste, linguistic lawyers, and now distributed all over the globe. So these two steps are then the last, before it can be officially signed and published. Also all the language versions are already there. We currently collect from the member states, let's say from Austria, Germany, and yes, Austria and Germany, the German version, and from France, Belgium, Luxembourg, the French version, the comments, to have, so the translation is done. And that would allow a publication of the regulation in January. And the entry into force is 20 days after the publication. So that would be it in February. So early March, and then you have the 18 months until it has to be applied. But for instance, as long and the moment when it's in place, in force, I mean, then we can already draft our delegated act to exempt the pallet wrappings and straps from Article 29.3 if their respective study, which we already launched, proves that the 100% targets for pallet wrappings and straps is not beneficial.
Thank you for explaining. So I'll just give one brief last question, and maybe we can give Wolfgang a rest finally. But put it quickly to the other panelists, and it's the most upvoted question by the audience. Comparing the two polls from earlier, to what extent do the panelists think that the audience is deluded about their readiness for PPWR?
Jody, you first.
You know, it's difficult to be put on the spot to judge a large room full of people who've just anonymously voted on a poll.
And you are all in black, and we are here under the full spotlight.
The poll was interesting, particularly because everyone here in the room is in a different position in the value chain. We may use different materials. We represent different industries who use packaging. So it's very difficult to generalize. I think, though, the challenge is common, whether it's the reporting challenge we discussed before lunch or the compliance challenge that we are discussing right now. This is a very large, comprehensive package. And as we read it, there are many pieces that need to fit into each other like a puzzle. And depending on the responses of the industry, particularly in response to the secondary legislation that we're eagerly waiting to see the results of, for example, with D4R, Decisions will be made along the value chain about which materials may be prioritized, others may be deprioritized, because no one has perfect information, and we're all making bets as informed as we can about the future trajectory of certain materials in terms of D4R, in terms of actual recyclability, and where we'll be in 2035 and 2040. So I take the survey with a grain of salt because none of us have a crystal ball to look into the future and decide how will other industry value chains be betting on certain materials and what will be the values set for them. How much will eco-modulated rates actually affect the decisions companies will make quickly as opposed to slowly? How coordinated will they be with the national governments? I don't know if you have a crystal ball for that one.
No, but if you look, for example, to the FOS Plus, I'm sorry, price list, where non-recyclable packaging is 4,000 euros per ton.
Yeah.
I think this is a price signal.
It's a clear message.
So if we get the competitive countries to make eco-modulation as well, so if you exaggerate the 4,000 to the whole of Europe, I think the packaging designers will get a date with the CEO in some companies. Why do we still use such packaging? So I think if we can, that's why we have so many best practices, we have so much learnings. So I don't think that the PPWD was a failure, as the Commission unfortunately said, because we achieved a lot and we know a lot. We just have to roll it out now. So I think we can make it. It will be extremely efforts, but I think we know what we have to do. And that's, especially here with the audience, I think they are the best in class. They go to high-level events, they are members of CFLEX, of Holy Grail, so very informed companies. This probably does not count for the whole, but this gives hope, because these companies know what to do.
Francesca, there's hope.
There is always hope. You want me to end on a high note?
Yes, please.
Let me know. On the answers to Tim, I think very delusional. I think attending many events, explaining with my colleagues the PPWR implications, we see clearly there are lots of questions, right? And that for which we're waiting still for answers also from the Commission. We will find them, I guess, in the Implementing Act. And secondary legislation overall. But, let's not forget that, yes, many big companies are clearly ahead of the curve. They're working hard. We don't just have big companies in Europe, right? So let's try to have the conversation with the gazillions of small and medium enterprises and how they can get their head around PPWR. So let's not be too delusional ourselves about it. But, clearly it's good that many companies are trying to prepare. But it's going to be a very complex exercise. It's a very complex exercise for multinationals, so everybody else, will find this a gigantic job. On the positive, I think, perhaps what Europe has missed over the last few years has been a good project to look at, right? 30 years ago, we had the single market. And then lately, all we had was a negative approach to what Europe and companies shouldn't do, right? And I think we need to change a little bit the mindset is what can we do? What is the positive and how do we get there? But that requires a change of mindset also, from the entire business community, not just from the political leadership and being more anchored in reality.
Thank you.
And I think tomorrow's program, we're going to be exploring some of those big challenges where we're exploring how do we change our mindset and where does that lead us in terms of our strategic positions. Thank you so much. You've done such a great job in taking us through this extremely multifaceted landscape. Thank you, Francesca, for joining us online. Thank you, Joachim, Jody, Wolfgang, and Hans.
Most welcome.
Thank you. Bye-bye.